The silence at Gate 42 wasn't peaceful. It was the terrifying quiet of a predator, realizing it had cornered the wrong prey. Odessa Goodwin didn't scream when the gate agent tore her boarding pass in half. She didn't cry when the wealthy socialite behind her laughed, calling her trash that belonged in cargo. She simply adjusted her glasses, looked at the digital departure board, and raised a single finger. In that split second, the engines of Flight 909 didn't just spool down. The entire airline's future began to crumble. They thought they were denying her a seat. They didn't realize she owned the sky they were trying to fly in. This is how one woman turned a humiliating rejection into the most expensive mistake in aviation history. The automatic doors of JFK's Terminal 4 slid open, admitting a gust of biting November wind and Odessa Goodwin. She pulled her beige trench coat tighter around herself, burying her chin in a wool scarf. To the casual observer, she looked like anyone else trying to escape the New York chill, tired, unassuming, and carrying a worn leather duffel bag that had seen better days. There were no flashing paparazzi bulbs, no entourage of security guards, and certainly no red carpet. That was exactly how Odessa liked it. At 34, Odessa was the silent majority shareholder of Ether Logistics, the parent company that quietly leased aircraft and engine parts to nearly every major commercial airline in the Western Hemisphere. She wasn't a celebrity. She was the infrastructure. But today, she wasn't the Titan of logistics, as the Wall Street Journal had once dubbed her in a buried article. She was just a daughter trying to get to London to see her father before his surgery. She approached the check-in counters for Royal Horizon Airlines, the flagship carrier known for its champagne service and exorbitant ticket prices. The economy line snaked back toward the entrance, a chaotic river of frustrated families and crying toddlers. The first-class lane, marked by a plush crimson carpet and velvet ropes, was completely empty. Odessa stepped onto the crimson carpet. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Odessa paused, looking up. Standing behind the high marble podium of the first-class desk was a man who looked as if he had been starched into existence. His name tag read, Derek. His uniform was impeccable, his hair gelled to a helmet-like hardness, and his expression was one of profound distaste. "The queue starts back there," Derek said, pointing a manicured finger toward the chaotic economy line without even looking her in the eye. He returned his gaze to his computer screen, dismissing her entirely. Odessa didn't move. She took a breath, fighting the exhaustion that had clung to her bones for the last 48 hours of board meetings. "I'm flying first class," she said softly. "I have a reservation." Derek finally looked up, and the sneer on his face deepened. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her comfortable sneakers and the worn leather of her bag. He didn't see the vintage quality of the leather, nor did he recognize the limited edition frames of her glasses. He saw a young black woman in casual clothes, and his internal bias filled in the rest. "Miss," Derek said, his voice dropping to a patronizing drawl, "this is the priority lane. It is for Royal Horizon's most elite members, and full-fare first-class passengers only. Upgrades are not processed here. Staff travel is not processed here. And mistakes," he added with a cruel smirk, "are definitely not fixed here. Please join the general boarding line before I have to call security for loitering." Odessa felt the familiar heat of indignation rise in her chest, but she tamped it down. "My name is Odessa Goodwin. If you check your manifest—" "I don't need to check the manifest to know you're in the wrong place," Derek interrupted, snapping his fingers toward the economy line. "Move, now. You are blocking the way for actual premium customers." As if on cue, the sliding doors behind Odessa opened, and a porter pushed a cart loaded with Louis Vuitton luggage into the terminal. Trailing behind the luggage was a woman wrapped in a white faux fur coat, clutching a tiny, trembling dog. It was Lydia Van Doren. Odessa recognized her instantly from the tabloids, an heiress to a frozen food empire, known more for her public tantrums than her business acumen. Lydia stopped, pulling down her sunglasses to glare at Odessa. "Derek, darling," Lydia drawled, her voice grating and loud. "Why is there an obstruction on the red carpet? I thought Royal Horizon promised an exclusive experience, not a charity shelter queue." Derek's demeanor transformed instantly. The sneer vanished, replaced by an oily, subservient smile. "Mrs. Van Doren, 1,000 apologies. We were just clearing the debris." He shot a venomous look at Odessa. She was just leaving. Odessa stood her ground, her boots planted firmly on the red carpet. "I'm not leaving. I have a ticket for flight 909, seat 1A. Lydia let out a shrill, incredulous laugh. "1A? Did you hear that, Derek? She thinks she's in 1A. That's my seat. I always book 1A. "There must be a system error if she thinks she has a ticket," Derek assured Lydia, leaning over the counter to intimidate Odessa. "Listen to me clearly. You are embarrassing yourself. You are disturbing our VIPs. If you do not step off this carpet in 3 seconds, I will have you banned from the airline. Step aside." Odessa looked from Derek's red, angry face to Lydia's smug, superior grin. It was a scene she had encountered too many times in her life, the assumption that she couldn't possibly belong in the spaces she had built with her own hands. "You really should check the name," Odessa said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I'm giving you a chance to do your job, Derek." "I am doing my job," Derek shouted, losing his composure. "My job is to keep the riffraff out. Security." He waved frantically at a bored-looking guard near the entrance. Odessa tightened her grip on her bag. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She simply stepped off the red carpet, moving just enough to let Lydia Van Doren pass. Lydia brushed past her, deliberately bumping Odessa's shoulder with her heavy purse. "Learn your place, honey," Lydia whispered, close enough for only Odessa to hear. "Go back to the back of the bus where you belong." Odessa watched as Derek fawned over Lydia, checking her bags and handing her a glass of pre-flight sparkling water, all while casting triumphant glares at Odessa. Odessa pulled out her phone. She didn't call customer service. She didn't tweet a complaint. She opened a secure app, verified her biometric ID, and scrolled through a list of active assets. She found the entry for Royal Horizon Flight 909. Asset status, active lease. Owner, Ether Logistics, Subdivision B. Lease Clause 14B. Owner retains right of immediate reclamation in event of breach of operational standards. She looked at Derek, who was laughing at something Lydia had said. He had no idea that the plane parked at the gate, the jet bridge he was standing near, and even the computer system he was using were all ultimately leased from her holding company. "Okay," Odessa whispered to herself. "If I don't belong in 1A, nobody does." The confrontation at the check-in desk was only the spark. The fire began to spread at the boarding gate. After being dismissed by Derek, Odessa had gone to a self-service kiosk, printed her boarding pass, which clearly confirmed first class, seat 1A, and proceeded through security. She endured the TSA check with patience, though her mind was racing with the sheer absurdity of the situation. The system had sold Lydia a ticket for 1A as well. That meant the airline had double-booked the seat, likely overriding Odessa's reservation the moment a high-value profile like Lydia Van Doren's popped up in the system. It was a common, greedy practice, but usually the airline had the decency to call the bumped passenger. Odessa arrived at the boarding gate, Gate 42. The massive Boeing 777 sat outside the window, a beautiful machine of aluminum and composite. Odessa knew this specific plane well. She had signed the purchase order for it 3 years ago. Derek Sallow was there too. Of course he was. He was the gate manager for the flight. He stood at the podium, flanked by 2 junior agents who looked nervous. Lydia Van Doren was already seated in the exclusive pre-boarding lounge, sipping another drink and loudly complaining about the types of people allowed in the airport these days. When Odessa approached the podium to board, Derek's eyes bulged. "I told you," he hissed, leaning over the scanner. "You are not getting on this plane." "I have a boarding pass," Odessa said, slapping the paper onto the counter. "Scan it." Derek snatched the paper. He didn't scan it. He crumpled it into a ball and dropped it into the trash bin behind him. "What boarding pass?" Derek smiled, a cruel, tight expression. "I don't see one. All I see is a disruptive passenger who refused to follow instructions at check-in." A hush fell over the nearby passengers. People in the waiting area lowered their phones and looked up. The tension was palpable. A young man in a hoodie took out his phone and started recording. "You just destroyed my property and denied me boarding despite a valid contract of carriage," Odessa stated, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet gate area. "You are violating federal aviation regulations." "I am the regulation today," Derek scoffed. "Look at you. You're shaking. You know you're trying to scam us. You probably printed a fake pass at home. We get your kind all the time, trying to sneak into first class for the free champagne. It's pathetic." "My kind?" Odessa asked, her eyebrows raising. "And what kind is that, Derek?" "The kind that can't afford Royal Horizon," Lydia Van Doren chimed in, walking up to the podium. She draped her arm over the counter, acting as if she and Derek were old friends defending a fortress. "Derek, just have the police remove her. She's ruining the vibe. I can smell her cheap perfume from here." "I don't wear perfume," Odessa noted dryly. "Exactly," Lydia wrinkled her nose. "Poverty. It has a scent." The audacity of the comment drew gasps from the crowd. Even the junior agents behind Derek looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Van Doren, please take your seat. We will handle this trash," Derek said, picking up the gate phone. "Security to gate 42. We have a non-compliant individual refusing to leave the jet bridge entrance." He slammed the phone down and turned to Odessa. "You have 5 minutes before the police drag you out in handcuffs. If I were you, I'd run." Odessa didn't run. She looked at the crowd. She saw a family looking at her with pity. She saw the man recording. She saw the business travelers looking at their watches, annoyed by the delay but saying nothing to defend her. "I want to speak to your station manager," Odessa said. "I'm the highest authority here," Derek lied. "The station manager is in a meeting and doesn't waste time on economy scammers." "Is that your final decision?" Odessa asked. "You are denying me passage on the aircraft?" "I am denying you existence in my terminal," Derek spat. "Get out of my sight." Odessa nodded slowly. "Very well." She stepped back from the podium, creating space between her and the raving agent. She didn't leave the gate area, though. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the aircraft. The ground crew was loading the final cargo containers. The fuel truck was just unhooking. She took out her phone again. The screen glowed with the interface of the Ether Logistics Asset Control dashboard. She navigated to the contract details for this specific tail number, N788RH. She tapped a button labeled Emergency Lease Termination, Clause 14. A warning box popped up. "Are you sure? This will ground the aircraft immediately. Significant financial penalties may apply to the lessee." Odessa didn't hesitate. She typed in her authorization code, V. Goodwin, CEO, 00001. She pressed execute. Back at the podium, Derek was laughing with Lydia. "Did you see her face? She actually thought she could intimidate me." "You're a hero, Derek," Lydia cooed. "Keep the riffraff out." Suddenly the lights at the gate flickered. Outside, the ground power unit attached to the plane abruptly shut down. The lights inside the aircraft cabin, visible through the windows, went dark. The digital board above Derek's head, which displayed Flight 909, London, on time, glitched. The green letters scrambled, turned amber, and then flashed a stark, blinking red. Flight 909. Status: cancelled. Reason: asset repossession. A collective groan went up from the 300 passengers waiting at the gate. Derek stared at the screen, confused. He typed frantically on his keyboard. "What is this?" he muttered. "System error. The board is glitching." The phone on the podium rang. It wasn't the internal line. It was the heavy red phone, the direct line to operations control. Derek picked it up, his face pale. "Gate 42, Sallow speaking." Odessa turned from the window. She watched Derek's face crumble. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked vase, replaced by a sheer, unadulterated panic. "What do you mean, grounded?" Derek squeaked into the phone. "Who grounded it? The pilot? No? Then who?" Odessa walked back toward the podium. The crowd parted for her, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't the silence of a predator cornering prey. It was the silence of a bomb about to go off. Derek dropped the phone. He looked at the computer screen, then at the plane, and finally, slowly, at Odessa. She held up her phone, the screen displaying the asset reclaimed confirmation in bold red letters. "I believe," Odessa said, her voice projecting clearly without shouting, "that you are now trespassing on my aircraft, Derek." The silence inside the terminal was mirrored by a more terrifying silence inside the cockpit of the Boeing 777. Captain Thomas O'Connell, a veteran pilot with 30 years of flight hours under his belt, stared at his instrument panel in disbelief. Moments ago, the Flight Management System, FMS, had been prepped for a transatlantic crossing. The auxiliary power unit had been humming, the screens glowing with navigation data. Now the screens were dead black. The ambient lighting had cut out, leaving only the emergency battery-operated standby lights casting a ghostly green glow over the flight deck. "What did you touch?" O'Connell barked at his first officer, a younger man named Kevin who looked as if he might be sick. "Nothing, Cap, I swear," Kevin stammered, flipping switches frantically. "We lost main bus power. APU is offline. Ground power unit is disconnected. It's like the plane just died. But look at the ICAO's screen." O'Connell squinted at the engine indication and crew alerting system, the only screen that still had a faint flicker of life, powered by the emergency bus. There were no engine warnings. There were no hydraulic failures. There was just a single line of text, blinking in a stark, uncompromising white font that O'Connell had never seen in his entire career. "System lockout. Owner override. Code 14B Auth VB." "Owner override," O'Connell whispered. "That's impossible. That's a repossession protocol. That only happens if the airline goes bankrupt while the plane is on the tarmac." He unbuckled his harness, grabbing his cap. "Stay here. Try to get the comms back up. I'm going to find out who just bricked my airplane." O'Connell stormed out of the cockpit, past the bewildered flight attendants who were holding flashlights and trying to calm each other down in the darkened galley. He marched up the jet bridge, the heavy metal tunnel echoing with the sounds of shouting coming from the gate area. When O'Connell burst through the jet bridge door into the terminal, he walked into a scene of absolute chaos. The passengers were in an uproar. A mob had formed around the podium. At the center of the storm was Derek Sallow, whose face had gone from arrogant flush to a pasty, sweaty white. Next to him, Lydia Van Doren was screaming into her cell phone, demanding her lawyer sue the airport. And standing in the eye of the hurricane, perfectly still, was the woman in the beige trench coat. "Captain!" Derek shouted, spotting the pilot. He pointed a trembling finger at Odessa. "It's her. She did something. She's a hacker, a terrorist." She touched her phone, and the board went red. The word terrorist acted like a spark in a room full of gasoline. The crowd gasped and recoiled, creating a wide circle around Odessa. Several passengers raised their hands as if to ward off a blow. Captain O'Connell pushed past Derek, stepping into the circle to face Odessa. He was a large man, imposing in his uniform with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders. He looked at the young woman, unassuming, calm, holding a smartphone loosely in her hand. She didn't look like a hacker. She looked like a tired passenger. But the look in her eyes, it was the same steel he saw in veteran Czech pilots. "Miss," O'Connell said, his voice gruff but controlled. "My gate agent is making some serious accusations. My aircraft just went dark. The error code says owner override. Do you know anything about that?" "He called me trash," Odessa said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise. "He tore up my boarding pass. He told me I didn't belong on the red carpet." "I don't care about customer service disputes right now," O'Connell snapped, his patience fraying. "I care about why my multi-million-dollar aircraft is a brick. Did you do this?" "I didn't hack anything, Captain," Odessa replied smoothly. "Hacking implies unauthorized access. I have full authorization. In fact, I have the supreme authorization." She turned her phone screen toward the captain. "Do you recognize this interface?" O'Connell leaned in. He saw the logo at the top of the app. Ether Logistics. He saw the tail number of his plane, and he saw the digital signature at the bottom of the lockout command, authorized by V. Goodwin, majority shareholder. O'Connell's eyes widened. He looked from the phone to Odessa's face. He had flown for Royal Horizon for 10 years, but everyone in the industry knew that Royal Horizon, like many airlines, didn't actually own most of their planes. They leased them. And the biggest lessor in the market was Ether Logistics. He swallowed hard. You're V. Goodwin?" "Odessa Goodwin," she confirmed. "And as of 5 minutes ago, I terminated the lease on this hull due to gross violation of operational standards and brand defamation, as per Clause 14B of our contract." "You cancelled the lease?" O'Connell asked, his voice cracking. "Not just the flight. You cancelled the plane?" "It seemed the only way to get Derek's attention," Odessa said, glancing at the gate agent who was now hyperventilating. "You can't do that!" Lydia Van Doren shrieked, pushing herself between the captain and Odessa. "Who cares who she is? She's inconveniencing me. Captain, arrest her. I demand you fly this plane." "I can't fly it, ma'am," O'Connell said, looking at Lydia with a mixture of annoyance and defeat. "She locked the avionics. Without her digital key, that plane is just 300 tons of aluminum furniture." "Then force her to unlock it," Lydia screamed, grabbing Odessa's arm. Odessa didn't flinch. She looked down at Lydia's hand on her coat, then up at Lydia's face. "Touch me again," Odessa said softly, "and I'll buy the frozen food company your grandfather built and liquidate it by lunchtime." Lydia snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. "What is going on here?" A booming voice echoed from the corridor. Running toward Gate 42 was a man in a bespoke navy suit, flanked by 2 breathless security guards. It was Mr. Henderson, the regional station manager for Royal Horizon. He was red-faced, his tie askew, holding a tablet that was pinging incessantly with alerts from corporate headquarters. Mr. Henderson didn't just run, he scrambled. In the world of aviation, grounding a flight was a headache. Losing a lease was a career-ending catastrophe. The alert he had received from HQ simply said, "Asset repossession imminent. Lesser on site. Mitigate Immediately. He skidded to a halt at the podium, gasping for air. He looked at the dark departure board, the powerless jet, the terrified Derek Sallow, and finally, the calm woman standing in the center of the chaos. "Who?" Henderson wheezed. "Who is the representative from Ether?" "That would be her," Captain O'Connell said, gesturing to Odessa. "She's not a rep, Henderson. She's the owner." Henderson looked at Odessa. He saw the sneakers, the trench coat, the lack of pretension. He paused. He was a smart man, a survivor of 3 airline mergers. He knew that the truly powerful rarely needed to dress up to prove it. "Ms. Goodwin?" Henderson asked, his voice trembling. "I'm Robert Henderson, station manager. There must be a misunderstanding. We received a notification of lease termination. Surely we can discuss this in the VIP lounge." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson," Odessa said. "And I have been informed by your staff that the VIP lounge, and indeed this entire priority lane, is not for my kind." Henderson turned slowly to Derek Sallow. The look on the station manager's face was enough to make a lesser man faint. "Derek, what did you say?" Derek was shaking his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Mr. Henderson, She looked. She was blocking Mrs. Van Doren. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. I was protecting the brand image." "Protecting the brand?" Odessa repeated, a dry laugh escaping her lips. "You insulted me. You destroyed my boarding pass. You threatened me with arrest. And you prioritized a passenger because of her coat and her dog, while dismissing me because of my skin and my silence." She stepped closer to Henderson. "I own 64 aircraft, currently in Royal Horizons fleet, Mr. Henderson. That is roughly 40% of your operational capacity. Today, I was reminded that your airline's culture is rot disguised as luxury. I don't like my assets being associated with rot." "Please," Henderson begged, holding up his hands. "Ms. Goodwin, I apologize. On behalf of the airline, I apologize. Derek is finished. I will fire him right now, on the spot. Just please, unlock the aircraft. We have 300 passengers here. Families. Connections." Odessa looked at the crowd. The anger in their faces had turned to awe. The young man who was recording was now streaming live, narrating the takedown of the century. "I care about the passengers," Odessa said, "which is why I'm going to make you an offer." She pointed at Derek. "He is fired, not just transferred. Terminated for cause." "Done," Henderson said immediately. "Derek, give me your badge. Get out." Derek stood frozen. "But Mrs. Van Doren said—" "I don't care what she said," Henderson roared. "Badge, now." Derek, sobbing openly, unclipped his ID badge and dropped it on the podium. He slumped away, the crowd parting for him, not with fear, but with disdain. "And her," Odessa said, turning her gaze to Lydia Van Doren. Lydia scoffed, crossing her arms. "You can't fire me. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I spend more on this airline in a year than you do in a lifetime." "Actually," Odessa corrected, "I just cost the airline about $40 million in the last 10 minutes. I think my financial impact is a bit heavier." She turned back to Henderson. "I want her banned." "Banned?" Henderson blinked. "From the flight?" "From the fleet," Odessa said calmly. "Any aircraft owned by Ether Logistics. If she is on the manifest, the plane doesn't fly. You can try to put her on your other planes, but remember, I supply your engines too. It might be very hard to find a seat for Mrs. Van Doren that doesn't involve one of my parts." Lydia's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. That's discrimination." "No." Odessa smiled, a cold, sharp expression. "It's the right of refusal. Private businesses can refuse service to anyone. Isn't that what you told me when I was standing on the carpet? You said I didn't fit the vibe? Well, Mrs. Van Doren, your vibe is a liability to my machinery. Henderson looked at Lydia, then at the silent, dark plane. It was a simple calculation. 1 socialite versus 40% of the fleet. Mrs. Van Doren, Henderson said, his voice flat. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the gate. We will be refunding your ticket. Refunding? Lydia shrieked. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue everyone. You can do that from the terminal entrance, Henderson said, nodding to security. Please escort Mrs. Van Doren out of the secure area. As the security guards approached her, Lydia looked around for support. But the crowd, who had watched her humiliate Odessa earlier, remained silent. Then the man in the hoodie started a slow clap. Another passenger joined in. Soon, the entire gate area was applauding as the screaming heiress was led away, her little dog barking wildly. Odessa watched her go, feeling no joy, only the heavy satisfaction of balance being restored. She's gone, Henderson said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Derek is gone. Please, Miss Goodwin, the families. They just want to go to London. Odessa nodded. She tapped her phone screen. Reinitializing lease. Authorization. Emergency override lifted. Outside the window, the ground power unit suddenly roared to life. The lights inside the cabin flickered and stabilized. The digital board above the gate blinked, the angry red letters dissolving back into a soothing green. Flight 909. Boarding soon. A cheer erupted from the passengers. Thank you, Henderson breathed, looking like he might collapse from relief. We will upgrade you to the royal suite, of course. Anything you need. I don't need the royal suite, Odessa said, picking up her worn leather bag. I booked seat 1A. That will be sufficient. She walked toward the jet bridge door, but just as she was about to cross the threshold, a new figure emerged from the crowd. It was a man in a sharp grey suit, holding a briefcase. He didn't look like an airline employee. He looked like a lawyer. Miss Goodwin, the man called out. Odessa turned. Yes? My name is Arthur Sterling, the man said. Odessa flinched internally at the name, but realized he was harmless. I represent the airport authority. While we appreciate you resolving the issue, the shutdown caused a ripple effect. 3 other flights were delayed due to the power grid fluctuation. The Port Authority is not happy about a private citizen controlling critical infrastructure. Odessa sighed. Send the bill to my office. It's not about the bill, the lawyer said, stepping closer, his voice lowering. The board of directors for Royal Horizon is on the phone. They aren't just happy with a restart. They want to know why a single individual has a kill switch for their fleet. They are calling for an immediate review of the Ether contract. They want to sue for breach of faith. Odessa adjusted her glasses. The drama wasn't over. The battle at the gate was won, but the war for her company was just beginning. Tell the board, Odessa said, her voice turning to steel, that if they want to review the contract, I'm happy to do so. But they should know that I'm currently looking at their competitor, Skyways, and they've been asking to lease 20 wide-body jets. Tell them if they sue me, I won't just turn off the lights. I'll give their wings to someone else. She turned and walked down the jet bridge. But as she boarded the plane, she knew this wasn't the end. Derek was a pawn. Lydia was a symptom. But the board? The board was the disease. And by showing her hand, she had just painted a target on her back. The cabin of Flight 909 was a sanctuary of hushed luxury, a stark contrast to the brawl at the gate. The lighting was a soft, calming violet. The scent of warmed nuts and expensive leather filled the air. In seat 1A, Odessa Goodwin finally unspooled her scarf. She accepted a glass of sparkling water from a flight attendant, whose hands shook so violently that a few drops splashed onto the linen tablecloth. "I'm so sorry, Miss Goodwin," the attendant whispered, looking terrified. "I'll get a fresh cloth immediately." "It's fine," Odessa said, offering a tired but genuine smile. "You didn't do anything wrong. Breathe." The attendant nodded, gratitude washing over her face, and hurried away. Odessa took a sip of water, looking out the window as the lights of New York faded into the black void of the Atlantic Ocean. She had hoped the flight would be the end of the conflict, a few hours of sleep before facing her father's medical team in London. She was wrong. "Comfortable?" The voice came from across the aisle. Odessa didn't turn immediately. She recognized the tone. It was the rich, baritone purr of a man who was used to boardrooms and golf courses, a man who believed his mere presence was a gift to the room. She turned her head slowly. In Set 1K, the prime seat on the opposite side, sat a man in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the average car. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair swept back and eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. He wasn't watching the movie screen. He was watching her. "Preston Galloway," Odessa said, identifying him instantly. He was a senior member of the Royal Horizon Board of Directors, a shark in a suit. He was known for his aggressive cost-cutting strategies, streamlining, he called it, which usually meant firing ground staff and reducing maintenance cycles to the legal minimum. "I'm surprised you know my face," Preston said, unbuckling his seatbelt and standing up. He moved across the aisle with the ease of someone who owned the space, taking the empty seat next to her. Seat 1B. He didn't ask permission. "I know the face of everyone who signs checks drawn on my accounts," Odessa replied, turning back to the window. "You voted against the engine upgrades last quarter, Mr. Galloway. You claimed the old turbines had another 5 years of life, despite the engineers' warnings." Preston chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "And you're the silent partner who just cost us $40 million and a PR nightmare because a gate agent was rude to you. A bit emotional for business, don't you think, Miss Goodwin?" "It wasn't emotion," Odessa said. "It was a correction. The market responds to quality. Your staff degraded the quality. I reset the standard." "You humiliated us?" Preston hissed, his voice dropping low so the other first-class passengers couldn't hear. "You think you're untouchable because you hold the leases? Let me educate you on how this world really works. You are a vendor, a supplier. You provide the hardware. We provide the brand. Without Royal Horizon, your planes are just metal tubes sitting in the desert." He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. "My legal team has been busy since takeoff. By the time we land in London, we will have filed an emergency injunction. We are going to void your Clause 14B as unconscionable. We are going to sue Ether Logistics for tortious interference. And personally, I'm going to make sure the industry sees you as unstable, an angry woman who snaps and grounds fleets on a whim. Who will lease from you then?" Odessa finally looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. "Are you threatening me, Preston?" "I'm negotiating." Preston smiled, showing too many teeth. "Here is the deal. When we land, you will issue a press statement. You will say the outage was a technical glitch in Ether's software. You will apologize to the airline for the error. You will take the blame. In exchange, we won't bury you in litigation for the next decade." It was a classic corporate ambush. He thought she was trapped in a metal tube, isolated from her lawyers, vulnerable to his intimidation. He thought she would break. Odessa reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. She unlocked it and placed it on the tray table between them. "I anticipated a move like this," Odessa said calmly. "Men like you always double down when challenged. You never apologize. You attack. She tapped the screen. A spreadsheet appeared. It wasn't a financial report. It was a maintenance log. "What is this?" Preston asked, frowning. "This is the internal maintenance schedule for the Royal Horizon fleet," Odessa explained. "Specifically the records for the streamlining program you championed. Do you see the column highlighted in red?" Preston squinted. "So, deferred maintenance is standard industry practice." "Deferring cosmetic repairs is standard," Odessa corrected. "Deferring microfracture inspections on landing gear struts is negligence, and falsifying the reports to make it look like the inspections happened, that's a felony." Preston's face went pale. That's proprietary data. You stole that." "I own the planes, Preston," Odessa said coldly. "The onboard computers upload every byte of data to my servers every time they dock. I didn't steal it. You sent it to me. I've known for months that you were cooking the books on safety checks to boost your quarterly bonuses. I was building a case. I was waiting for the right moment to present it to the FAA." She swiped the screen. A video appeared. It was a recording of a board meeting from 3 months ago. In the video, Preston was laughing, saying, "The regulators are blind. As long as the planes fly, nobody looks at the paperwork." Preston stared at the video, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "I wasn't going to release this today," Odessa said, locking eyes with him. "I was going to give the new CEO a chance to fix it quietly. But then you threatened me. You threatened my reputation. You called me unstable." She tapped a button on the screen labeled Upload. "What did you just do?" Preston whispered, grabbing her wrist. Odessa pulled her arm away with a sharp yank. "Flight 909 has excellent Wi-Fi, doesn't it? I just sent a package to the Federal Aviation Administration, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, and the New York Times investigative desk. It includes the maintenance logs, the falsified reports, and that video of you mocking the regulators." You can't," Preston stammered. "That will kill the stock. That will ground the airline." "No," Odessa said, picking up her water glass again. "It will ground you. The airline will survive, under new management. But you, Preston, you're going to prison." The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into London Heathrow. Please return to your seats." Preston stumbled back to seat 1K. He collapsed into the leather chair, staring blankly at the seatback in front of him. He looked like a man who had just fallen out of the sky without a parachute. Odessa put her headphones on. She selected a Mozart concerto, closed her eyes, and waited for the landing. The turbulence was over. The crash was about to begin. Heathrow Airport was grey and rainy, a typical London morning. But inside Terminal 5, the atmosphere was electric. As Flight 909 taxied to the gate, the passengers noticed something unusual. Through the rain-streaked windows, they could see a fleet of black sedans parked on the tarmac near the jet bridge stairs. Police cars with flashing blue lights were positioned at the wingtips. "Is there a bomb?" a passenger in row 2 asked nervously. "Maybe it's a diplomat," another suggested. In seat 1A, Odessa packed her bag. She checked her phone. It was flooded with notifications. The story had broken while they were in the air. The Gate 42 incident was viral, but the Galloway leak was global news. Royal Horizon stock had plummeted 18% in 4 hours. The board of directors had issued an emergency suspension of Preston Galloway pending an internal investigation. The plane came to a halt. The seatbelt sign turned off. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain O'Connell's voice came over the speaker, sounding grave. "Please remain seated. We have been instructed by local authorities to hold the doors closed for a moment." Preston Galloway, in seat 1K, was sweating profusely. He was typing frantically on his phone, likely trying to move assets or call lawyers who weren't picking up. He looked at Odessa with pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he hissed across the aisle. "Do you know how many jobs will be lost? You selfish." "Accountability feels like an attack when you're not ready for it," Odessa interrupted, standing up and putting on her coat. The cabin door opened, but it wasn't the ground crew who entered. 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police boarded, followed by a man in a suit from the UK Serious Fraud Office. They spoke briefly to the flight attendant, who pointed, not at Odessa, but at Seat 1K. The officers walked past Odessa. They stopped at Preston's seat. "Mr. Preston Galloway," the lead officer asked. "This is a mistake," Preston shouted, jumping up. "I am a British citizen. I have immunity. That woman over there, she's the one. She hacked the plane. She's the criminal." He pointed a shaking finger at Odessa. The officer didn't even look at her. "Mr. Galloway, we have a warrant for your arrest issued in cooperation with the FBI regarding massive corporate fraud and endangerment of public safety," the officer recited. "Please place your hands behind your back." "No, look at her!" Preston screamed as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "She's the villain. She planned this." Odessa stepped out into the aisle. She stood face to face with the man who had tried to bully her into silence. "I didn't plan for you to be a criminal, Preston," she said calmly. "I just turned on the lights." The officers hauled a struggling Preston Galloway off the plane. The first-class passengers watched in stunned silence. As he was dragged away, the passengers turned to look at Odessa. There was no judgment in their eyes anymore. There was only respect, and perhaps a little fear. Odessa nodded to the flight attendants and walked off the plane. But the terminal was another gauntlet. As she exited the jet bridge and entered the arrivals hall, a wall of noise hit her. Reporters, dozens of them. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones were thrust over the barriers. Ms. Goodwin, is it true you grounded the fleet? Did you know about the safety violations for months? Are you planning a hostile takeover of the airline?" Odessa kept her head down, moving briskly. She didn't want the fame. She didn't want the interviews. She just wanted to find her driver. Suddenly, a young woman burst through the line of reporters. She wasn't holding a microphone. She was wearing a Royal Horizon uniform, a flight attendant's uniform. Security guards moved to intercept her, but Odessa held up a hand. "Wait." The young flight attendant stopped, breathless. She looked at Odessa with wide, tearful eyes. "Ms. Goodwin," the woman gasped. I'm Sarah. I was the attendant on the flight where the engine failed last year. The one they said was pilot error." Odessa remembered the incident. The airline had blamed the crew to avoid insurance hikes. "I remember, Sarah," Odessa said softly. "I just saw the news," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "The logs you released. They prove it wasn't us. They prove the turbine was cracked before we took off. You cleared our names." Sarah started to cry. "Thank you. Nobody listened to us. Thank you." Odessa felt a lump form in her throat. This was the karma she cared about, not the destruction of a billionaire, but the protection of the people he had crushed. "You deserved better, Sarah," Odessa said, "and things are going to get better. I promise." Odessa turned to the cameras. For the first time, she stopped. She looked directly into the lens of the nearest news camera. "If there are any other employees who have been silenced," Odessa announced, her voice ringing out across the hall. "If there are any other passengers who have been mistreated, my office is open. Ether Logistics is no longer a silent partner. We are watching, and we are cleaning house." She turned and walked through the parting crowd, her coat billowing behind her like a cape. She had arrived in London to save her father, but she had ended up saving the soul of a company. Waiting at the curb was a black town car. The driver opened the door. "To the hospital, Miss Goodwin?" the driver asked. "Yes," Odessa said, sliding into the back seat. "And then, take me to the Royal Horizon headquarters. I have a board meeting to crash." The headquarters of Royal Horizon was a glass and steel fortress in the heart of London's financial district. Inside the boardroom on the top floor, the atmosphere was funereal. The remaining 10 members of the board of directors sat around a mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the glow of tablets displaying plummeting stock graphs. The chair at the head of the table, usually occupied by the CEO, was empty. The CEO had resigned via email 20 minutes ago, citing health reasons, which was corporate code for fleeing before the indictments land. "We need a scapegoat," muttered one director, a man named Charles. "We blame Galloway. We say he acted alone. We paint Odessa Goodwin as a hostile external actor." "Hostile?" A woman's voice rang out from the doorway. "I'm the only one trying to save this company from you." The heavy double door swung open. Odessa Goodwin walked in. She hadn't changed clothes. She was still wearing the trench coat from the airport, damp from the London rain. She looked like a storm front moving into a greenhouse. "You can't be in here!" Charles shouted, standing up. "Security." "Security works for the building," Odessa said, tossing a thick folder onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "And as of this morning, Ether Logistics just bought the building's management firm. Technically, I'm your landlord. Sit down, Charles." Charles sat. Odessa walked to the head of the table. She placed her hand on the empty CEO's chair but didn't sit in it. She remained standing, looking down at them. "For years," Odessa began, her voice steady, "you have treated this airline like a piggy bank. You cut maintenance. You underpaid staff. You treated passengers like cargo. You created a culture where men like Derek Sallow felt empowered to bully people, and men like Preston Galloway felt empowered to break the law. We were maximizing shareholder value," Charles argued weakly. "You were maximizing your own bonuses," Odessa corrected, "and in the process, you forgot the only asset that matters, trust. Today I am reclaiming that asset." She opened the folder. "This is a tender offer," Odessa announced. "I am converting my debt holdings into equity. Effective immediately, Ether Logistics is taking a controlling interest in Royal Horizon." The room erupted. "Hostile takeover! You can't!" "It's not hostile," Odessa said with a faint smile. "It's a rescue. Because if you don't sign this, I will recall every engine, every landing gear strut, and every avionics computer in your fleet by midnight. You won't just be bankrupt, you will be physically unable to leave the ground." The silence that followed was absolute. They knew she wasn't bluffing. She had grounded a 777 because of a rude comment. They could only imagine what she would do to save the company's soul. One by one, the directors nodded. They signed the papers. The old regime was dead. "One more thing," Odessa said as she collected the signatures. "You are all fired." "What?" Charles gasped. "But we just signed." "You signed the transfer," Odessa said. "Now you're signing your resignation letters. I don't build the future with the people who broke the past. Get out!" As the disgraced directors shuffled out of the room, Odessa turned to the window. The rain was clearing over London. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Captain O'Connell," she said, when he answered. "How would you like a desk job? I need a new director of operations, someone who knows that safety isn't a line item in a budget." 3 hours later, the beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the private hospital room. Odessa sat in the plastic chair, holding the hand of an elderly man who looked small in the large hospital bed. Marcus Goodwin opened his eyes. He looked at his daughter, seeing the exhaustion etched into her face. "You're late," he rasped. a twinkle in his eye. Flight delayed? Something like that. Odessa smiled, squeezing his hand. I had to fire a few people on the way here. Did you raise your voice? Marcus asked. It was an old lesson he had taught her. The loudest person in the room is the weakest. The silent one holds the power. No, Dad, Odessa whispered. I didn't scream. I just adjusted the logistics. Marcus squeezed her hand back. Good. Never let them see you sweat, Vivi. You own the sky. Make sure it stays blue. Odessa rested her head on his shoulder. The corporate wars, the screaming heiresses, the corrupt board members. It all faded away. Here, she wasn't a titan of industry. She was just a daughter who had made it in time. 6 months later, the world had moved on, but the players in the drama had found their new places in the order of things. Lydia Van Doren stood at the counter of a budget airline in Miami. She was trying to fly to Paris for Fashion Week. I'm sorry, Mum, the agent said, looking at the screen. Your name is flagged on the Global Alliance deny list. We can't sell you a ticket. But that was Royal Horizon, Lydia shrieked. This is a different airline. Yes, Mum, the agent replied. But we use ether engines, and the contract says, let me see, no service to individuals classified as operational risks. Next in line, please. Lydia stormed off, destined for a long, slow boat ride. Derek Sallow was working too. He had found a job at a busy downtown bus terminal. He wasn't a manager. He was the guy who had to load the heavy luggage into the undercarriage of the buses in the sweltering heat. Hey! A passenger yelled at him, throwing a bag at his feet. Hurry up, trash! I'm in a rush. Derek looked up, wiping sweat from his eyes. He opened his mouth to snap back, to use his old arrogance. Then he remembered the red departure board. He remembered the silence of the gate. Yes, sir, Derek mumbled, lifting the heavy bag. Right away, sir. And Odessa Goodwin? She was at JFK again. She was wearing the same comfortable sneakers and the same trench coat. She walked up to the Royal Horizon check-in desk. The new agent, a young woman with a bright smile, looked up. She didn't recognize Odessa's face, but she saw the name on the passport. Ms. Goodwin, the agent said, her eyes widening. We have the royal suite prepared for you. No, wait. That's okay, Odessa said, looking at the long, chaotic line of economy passengers behind her. Families were tired. Babies were crying. Actually, Odessa said, taking her boarding pass, open up the priority lane for everyone today. Let the families with kids board first. I can wait. The agent blinked. But that's against protocol. I changed the protocol. Odessa winked. She took her bag and joined the back of the line, standing among the people. She didn't need the red carpet to know who she was. She was the woman who had turned the lights off to help the world see clearly. And as she waited, she watched the planes take off outside, knowing that every single one of them was flying safer and fairer, because she had dared to say no with a single silent gesture. And that is the story of how one silent gesture brought down an entire empire of arrogance. It just goes to show that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a passenger by their trench coat. Odessa didn't use her voice to scream. She used her power to act, and in doing so, she saved more than just her own dignity. What would you have done if you were in Odessa's shoes? Would you have revealed your identity sooner, or did she wait for the perfect moment? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice and instant karma, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story about the underdogs winning big. Thanks for watching. And remember, be kind, because you never know who you're talking to.